So I'm a lawyer by profession, went to court for 2 years. Before going to court, I did a year of STEM, and then left and formed an NGO, which is the Institute for Legislative Affairs. Selin is the current CEO. Did that for 8 years, and then moved to West Africa, working with the American Cancer Society, and I was in Togo, so that's the short answer to where I got my husband from. I met him while there. And then we moved back to Kenya 6 years ago, and I currently work for McCabe Center, which is based in Melbourne, in Australia. Now, I'm not name dropping so that you know I've been to all of those places, merely explaining my antecedents. I have 3 children, 6 years, 3 years, and 1.85. Number 3 was a bit of a surprise, but it was God's surprise. It was a surprise because I'm what they call in medicine geriatric pregnancies, which basically means when you get children over 40, the doctors get very worried. They call you geriatric. Either way, I'm very happy with my 3 kids. So we're going to talk about advocacy today, and we are going to split the presentation into 2. So I'll handle the first bit, and then I'll hand over to Selin. And we are basically going to talk about the story of Institute for Legislative Affairs, in short, ILA. So while I was preparing, I came across that quote that some people feel the rain, others just get wet. And so if you remember when Oliver started, was it Oliver? Not sure, actually Bishop Oginde, who talked about seeing and looking. You know there's a difference between seeing and looking. Yes. So that's what that means. So some people, it rains and they just get wet. Others actually feel the rain. And so I'm hoping that by the time we are through, you'll have moved from seeing to looking. Because seeing is just an image flashes before your eyes, yeah? And they do the biological thing, which is to notice that something passed. Looking is more active. It is observing. It is analyzing what you have seen. And in the case of advocacy, it is doing something about it. Okay, before I start, what is advocacy? And don't repeat what I've just said about seeing and looking and acting. What is advocacy? You know, you guys are clever. You're avoiding meeting my eyes. Because whoever meets my eyes will be asked to answer the question. What is advocacy? Yeah, Madam here. When you're thinking, what is advocacy?
I think advocacy is raising concerns about issues that you're not comfortable with, and raising them with passion. It may be through your giftings. For example, if I'm gifted in art, I may do some graffiti in regards to no corruption, or do a song in regards to just airing out my stand towards corruption.
Okay, next slide please. So what we're going to cover today is a brief description of ILA, what it does, why it was founded. We'll define advocacy and the different types of advocacy. We'll talk a little bit about the place of advocacy within Christian mission, the biblical principles that can guide the Christian's engagement in advocacy, key issues of social concern in our society that require advocacy, and then we'll explain the ones that ILA picked and why it picked those, and then how to run an advocacy campaign. And so we'll give a bit of theory and then the practical illustration from what ILA has done on one issue. And then we'll have a little question and answer, and then we're going to go and do the group work that we were supposed to do yesterday. And so the reason we picked Am's group work was because he started on the first half of advocacy, which was research and analysis. But advocacy obviously goes beyond analysis, yeah? It actually goes to then what do you do about the problem that you have researched and analyzed. And so we felt we could use the same scenarios, and actually if we do it now, then you're able to answer the full set of questions. Next one. So ILA is a not-for-profit organization. Basically that means we are an NGO. We work closely with policy-making institutions, government departments, members of parliament, and other stakeholders in the legislative process to draft and advocate for pro-people policies and legislation. So I think it was Boniface who was asking, how do we talk to government, yeah? How do we take action? And so we'll tell you a bit about how we decided to take action. Now you'll see some words there. So for example, pro-people, that's a very NGO-ish term. Early on when ILA started, we decided that we were not going to overtly call ourselves Christians, though we are very much Christian. You've actually seen the ILA board here. You saw Njonjo Mwe? Do you doubt he's a brother? I know some doubt because of some of the things he's done, but he's a very fiery brother. You know, when the fire burns hot, that's when you jump over a fence and you grab a minister's flag. That's like Jeremiah swallowing books and Hosea marrying a prostitute. So that's the fire of the Lord. You saw Abraham Rugo? Do we doubt he's a brother? Yeah, so all of those have been part of ILA's board, either the initial board or the current one. You saw Patrick Mariro? He was also a board member. So we are all born again, but we decided very early on that our selling point is not in calling ourselves Christians. Our selling point is in living out our faith in the field that we have chosen. And so hopefully anybody who engages with any of us will very quickly learn that we are born again, but we don't need to say so. And so when we talk about our vision, which is a just society governed by fair and righteous laws, we debated a lot about this because obviously we're an organization that's about law. Most of us in the initial team were lawyers. And so we define fairness and righteousness according to the Bible. So there's fairness, it's a word in English, but for us the standard of fairness is God's standard of fairness. And then the righteousness we are referring to here is the righteousness in the Bible. And so you've talked about it a lot this week. It started off with Oliver Kisaka. We touched on it a bit in Integral Mission. It was touched on also today, and even Njonjo talked about it when he talked about justice. That righteousness is a pillar of God's throne. So that's the righteousness that we are talking about here. And so when we were debating during our forming stages what it is we want to do, we said that we are a group of lawyers who are concerned. And we want to use the thing that we have, which is a law degree, to do something in this society. And so we felt the easiest place to start. What was Moses asked when he was sent to Egypt? What do you have in your hand? So what we had in our hand was a law degree. All of us had studied law. And so we said the easiest place for us to start is on the laws, because at least we are equipped to deal with laws. And so then we decided we wanted fair and righteous laws in this country. And so then in terms of our mission, let me first go to the history to then explain how we came to the mission. So you've heard about the Focus Associates Conference. It's a very powerful conference. The next time you hear there's another one, please attend. A lot of the things you're hearing about here were birthed at one Focus conference or another. So all of us were in the 2004 Focus Associates Conference. At the time, I was just finishing my STEM. And Mariro was a bit behind me. Chris Kinyanjui, the General Secretary of NCCK, who was also one of our initial board members, was about 2 years ahead of me. Kiragu Washira was also there. I'm not sure Njonjo was there in that conference. And so the theme of that conference was lobbying and advocacy. We got somebody from Parliament who works there who was talking to us about the process. And basically what struck us the most was there's a lot of complaining then as now about the quality of MPs in Kenya. Not just the quality of MPs, but even worse, the quality of legislation that comes out of the House. And in our case at that point, even the quantity. So I think that year there were about 6 bills that Parliament passed. So all of us were complaining. The first thing they do, they come into office, they raise their salaries, and then they can't even be bothered to work. So in terms of the quantity, because one of the key functions of Parliament is to enact legislation. So if you go in there and you spend time throwing chairs at one another, kutoangana in public, but you're not actually legislating, then why are we paying members of Parliament? And so we were really complaining about Parliament. And so being that he worked there, he came and said, yes, that's true, they do all of those things, but they also have problems. And so instead of complaining about those problems, can you people pick this up and come to help solve the problem? And so the problem that these MPs were facing, is there a degree called Member of Parliament? No. There's none. So they come in as doctors, farmers, fishermen, thugs like Sonko. All of those come to Parliament. Lawyers, you know, but there's nobody who has gone to a school that teaches them how to be a member of Parliament. Nobody teaches them how to make laws. Then suddenly they are thrown there and they have to start legislating. So he said at a technical level, there's a capacity issue. Many of them don't know. Can you imagine Echesa? Who was it showing me today? Echesa was boxing somebody. Echesa is now your member of parliament. And you're telling him to do the things ARMS does, budget. What does Echesa know about budgets, other than how to box people to get what he wants? So that is the situation they are in. So he said they need help. So even as you criticize them, appreciate that they need help. They need research experience, analysis. They didn't have a research assistant those days. They also didn't have a PA. These things came, I think, after 2007. So the MP has come in there and he doesn't have technical staff. So he said, if somebody can plug that gap, then we will start to see better legislation coming out. And so we said, okay, we've been told the problem, let's come up with a solution. So we're about 20. After the conference, we started meeting on Saturday mornings, brainstorming what we could do. So we decided to form a lobby group. I think we were very ambitious those days. We had no idea what lobbying is because, again, there is no degree called lobbying. Even the certificate course. Nowadays, there's something called project management, but those days there wasn't. And so as we brainstormed and thought, let's form this lobby group, we realized because we know nothing about this, why don't we pick an issue and learn as we go? We cut our teeth on it. So we said, now how do we pick our issue? And so we said, given that we are Christians and we want righteous, fair, and just laws in this country, one, let's pick an issue that we know when it passes, it will change the whole of Kenya at one go. Now, one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about law, and my personal motto is changing the world one law at a time, is because when the president signs, the whole of Kenya changes at one go. So advocacy and legislation is earth-changing. It changes the whole country. It takes time. Somebody said the process of making laws is like making sausages. So please don't ask. Just eat the sausage when it's done. And if you know a sausage, they put things inside into the intestine. So it's an ugly process. But at the end, you get a very nice sausage. And when you eat it, it's delicious. So we were excited. And so we said, let's get in there. So let's pick one law that when it is passed, it will change the whole country. At that time, I think we were about 40 million Kenyans. So we'll really have an impact. Two, we said, let's pick an issue that has stalled. It's not moving because it's not politically expedient, yet it is necessary. And it is something that God would want for this country. And then, of course, being Christians, there were certain issues that we could not pick because we have got certain values. And so as we looked around, we realized there is something called a tobacco control law that is stuck in this country. And so since 1998, there had been a bill from the Ministry of Health that was not moving. And remember now this is 2004, so that's like 6 years. And when we analyzed why this bill is not moving, we realized it's because there's a very powerful opponent. British American Tobacco makes a lot of money out of killing people, and they lobby, and they're very powerful, and they bribe politicians. And at that point in time, there was no politician willing to stick their heads out against BAT. They can actually campaign against you. So they fund your opponent in your constituency, and you go home. So we said, this is the right bill for us as Christians to pick. So we picked the bill, we read it. None of us knew anything about tobacco control. As you can see, I'm a lawyer, even though I work for a cancer organization. And we started reading, and then we went to the ministry. Very excited, very passionate, very enthusiastic like you. And we thought they'll welcome us with open arms. So we walked in and announced, we are here. What happened? Nobody paid attention to us. So after tukagonga mwamba, we decided, let's find another way of doing this. And so we happened to bump into somebody called Kaguthi. Joseph Kaguthi is a very passionate man, and at that time he was at Nakada. So he was very excited to get some lawyers who are willing to work for free. So he told us, now, what I can give you, I can't pay you, I have no money. Well, no money to pay us. But I can give you a boardroom to sit in if you ever need a place to meet. And when you are ready to talk to policymakers, you just tell me who you want to talk to, and I will connect you to them. So we started the journey with Kaguthi. So we sat down, we drafted the law. There's a degree called legislative drafting, which I do not have. So we learned what we knew by doing. We drafted, and then we started working on this with Kaguthi. And along the way, we discovered we needed a policy champion. So Celine will talk a bit about that. And so in terms of strategy, we decided to get a private member. And so this private member was the Honorable Go Sungu. He was willing to push the bill for us. And so now we took our bill to Parliament. And so basically we're using this as a pressure tactic so that to force the ministry to move their own bill, because tobacco control is a health issue. Ministry of Health should do it, but they have refused. And of course we discovered as we got inside there that the minister had not really been bribed, she had been compromised. I will not name names, or maybe you'll figure out who it is. So some CSR had been done in her constituency. They had built a toilet. Now on the face of it, a toilet is a good thing, isn't it? Especially in a market where there's none. So when the offer came to build toilets, she was very happy. The toilet was built, it was colored in BAT colors, and anytime she tried to do anything, what did they do? They reminded her about the toilet. You remember our toilet? So her hands were tied. That is the danger of CSR. So anyway, the minister couldn't move because her hands were tied. Her technical staff wanted to move it, but politically, they couldn't do anything. Remember that time ministers were MPs, eh? They were not cabinet secretaries the way we know them now. So with Gor Sungu, we took our bill for first reading. That shamed her. She had to bring hers for first reading. After that, she stopped. So we took ours for second reading. Hata yakakuja na yake second reading. So now you'd see on the order paper in Parliament, Tobacco Control Bill number 1 and Tobacco Control Bill number 2. So the speaker said, now this is creating confusion. Merge your bills. Once we got to merge them, we beefed up the content in hers, and now they moved the bill together with Gor Sungu, and we ended up with one of the best tobacco control laws on the continent. So that is where ILA started. This was 2004. Eventually, it passed into law in 2007. And since then, we have one other bill to our name. I don't know if you've heard of something called unclaimed financial assets. ILA is behind that. We've also done work on mental health. We are currently working with the Ministry of Health on the mental health policy. We've done work on road safety. We've done work on alcohol control. And now we are also working on control of unhealthy foods. And so what you can notice is that these things have something in common, yeah? Most of them except unclaimed financial assets. What's in common there?
Health.
Health. What's further in common? Celine will tell you what's in common. All of those things are risk factors. For what? Cancer. One of them. There's a broader term for the diseases that some of those things cause. NCDs. Yeah. Good. Now you can see you're with me. Yeah, so that's the history of ILA. That's where it came from. So I was the first CEO. At the time I joined, I was everything. So I was the office messenger. I was the lobbyist. Sometimes I would be called by ministry. That's the day I decided to go to town and collect mail. So I show up in jeans and some dusty shoes. Those days, of course, I didn't have a car. And they got used to me like that. So it reached a point, in fact, the guards at Afia House used to think I work in Afia House. So they see me coming and they just open the gate. Yeah, so that was the story. So currently we've got a board of 7. We have a staff of 4. So normally the staff team is 4 to 7. And then because we came from Focus, we picked something from them, which is the internship aspect. And remember I said it's really important to invest in young people. So ILA always has an intern. We pick a fresh graduate. And as I said, what we believe in is passion. If we get a passionate person, we can train anything. So the same way I learned how to draft, I learned how to lobby, I learned how to schmooze with politicians, we can teach that to anybody. What we can't teach you is passion. Next one, please. So let's talk about advocacy. So somebody said that the problem of lawyers is one of definition. Lawyers like defining. I'm looking here at Rabin and Gloria. So as usual, of course, we first have to define. Boy, where has it gone to? So starting with the dictionary definition, advocacy, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, is the act or process. Now I'm actually failing. My main job is capacity building, and one of the things you learn is to be able to give your presentation without a PowerPoint. The act or process, scroll through the next two and then full screen it for me. So it's basically the act or process of pleading for something, supporting something. And so the root of that word comes from Latin, and it's the same word as advocate. So advocate, a lawyer, basically acts on behalf of others. And so actively supporting a cause or proposal or speaking on behalf of or in support of another person, place or thing. According to Wikipedia, which you should never quote in academic writing, but I have taken academic license, advocacy is an activity by an individual or group that aims to influence decisions within political, economic, and social institutions. And so going back to when we're talking about integral mission, and he was talking about the different steps. Remember there was CM, CCM, sijui other things. At first I wanted to ask him, is that Chama cha Mapinduzi? Then I realized I was being facetious, so I decided to keep quiet. So at its most basic level, there's what you could call social welfare. Yeah? When a beggar stops you in the street and you give them 20 shillings, that is social welfare. Yeah? He was complaining about that when the church does it, that there's something and then they come and they give. Yeah? So that's at the most basic level. And I think what we all agreed is that, and even Jonjo mentioned it, there is room for that. Because when somebody is starving, you first feed them, yeah? You don't tell them, come for fishing lessons that will take 3 months. He'll have collapsed before the end of the fishing lessons. So that's the first level. But advocacy is going beyond that level. The second level could be to teach him how to fish. I wanted to tell him, you left out a third level. After he's caught the fish, what is he supposed to do with them? You have to create a value chain, isn't it? That's a problem in Africa. We produce coffee, it's a raw material, we are not processing. Nescafe comes and buys it from us as coffee beans, 50 shillings. Nescafe, a small carton like this, comes back, how much do we pay for it? I don't know if you drink Nescafe, maybe you're still drinking Kahawa #1. That's what we used to drink in campus. So that third step, which is value addition, is you're now getting to the realm of structures. And so the key thing about advocacy is that you're not dealing with symptoms. So when the beggar comes and asks for 20 shillings, the symptom there is hunger, isn't it? And so when you give them 20 bob, you've dealt with the symptom for the day. If you're going to deal with the root cause, which is that they are poor, which is why they cannot afford food, you will not deal with poverty by giving 20 shillings. You will have to change a structure or a system. What Njonjo was calling structural injustice. And that's where advocacy comes in, because advocacy is dealing with structures, institutions, policies that create all of these problems. And so at ILA, we don't do social welfare at a corporate level. Maybe me and Celine still give 20 bob to beggars, but at ILA, we don't engage in that. And part of the problem with Christians is that we are engaging at social welfare, sometimes even at CCM community mobilization, but there's not enough of us at advocacy. So even when you mobilize the community and they're all shouting, but you're not giving them a policy solution, you still haven't solved the problem. And so the reason I'm talking to you people today is because you're going to be in a position to actually change these structures that are causing the problem in Kenya. So there are different types of advocacy. There's social justice advocacy, and that is in Njonjo's field, a bit of Okia Mtata. It looks at power relations in a society, people's participation, and a vision of a just society. Advocacy for social justice represents a series of actions taken and issues highlighted to change what is into what should be. And so what should be is a more just and decent society. And so social justice advocacy targets the political system. Next one, please. Okay. There's budget advocacy. ARMS does this. And at the level of budget advocacy, this is where you're trying to get civil society and the community to engage with government budget to make the government more accountable to the people and promote transparency. It also enables citizens and social action groups to compel the government to be more alert to the needs and aspirations of people in general and the deprived sections of the community. Now, from the case study Celine will share, ILA does a bit of this with regard to our issue. So we engage with the budget with regard to NCDs. Then there is health advocacy, which is again where ILA also is. And here we are talking about supporting and promoting patients' healthcare rights, as well as enhancing community health and health policy initiatives that focuses on availability, safety, and quality of care. And in our case, we are focusing on prevention. So we are in the health advocacy space. There's something called ideological advocacy. And so in this approach, groups fight, sometimes during protests, to advance their ideas in the decision-making circles. Can someone give me an example of this one?
BBI.
Okay, BBI. Another one, Black Lives Matter?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Next one. By the way, I'm not a supporter of Black Lives Matter. Eh?
What? All lives matter.
No, it's not even that.
No.
When you're talking about ideological advocacy, the all lives matter, I agree. There's a philosophy, and part of what we are trying to build in you people is a Christian mind. So all of these things have got a philosophy behind them. So on the surface, it looks like what we are just fighting for here, yeah? But what we are fighting for here is driven by some thinking and some ideology. And so when you look at Black Lives Matter, there's something that's called critical race theory. Have you heard of that one?
Yes.
I would urge you to go and look it up. Critical race theory. And critical race theory as an ideology basically says that the source of inequality in this world is that there are haves and have-nots. In Kenya, what's the equivalent? Hustlers and dynasties. That's the whole problem. So we as hustlers have to do what to the dynasty? Remove them. That's what Black Lives Matter is saying. The black man is in trouble because the white man is the oppressor, isn't it? It's a story of the oppressor and the oppressed. And the only way that the oppressed can have any space is to eliminate the oppressor. Can you have a society where you eliminate one half?
No.
Completely, in terms of overturn it and now we oppress them. Is that just? So because you have suffered injustice, should you commit injustice on somebody else? Do two wrongs make a right? So that's where Black Lives Matter is coming from. Of course, there are other ideologies behind Black Lives Matter. Before they got into prominence and then Christians started checking them out, they had a manifesto. And some of the things they were talking about was, we need to redefine the nuclear family. It doesn't work for blacks. What were they saying? What is wrong with black families? In America, not here.
A lot of males go to prison.
So, fatherless families. Do you remember a guy called Jacob Blake who caused riots in Wisconsin? The guy was shot 7 times by a cop. That man is 29 and he already has 7 children.
Wow.
At what rate is he giving birth to children? At 29, he's got 7. And rest assured, it's not one woman, eh? 3 different women. That's the problem with black families. The problem is not the whites. The problem is the women are promiscuous, the men are irresponsible, and they're in prison. That's why Jacob Blake is the way he is. He grew up without a father. He grew up listening to gangster rap that talks about rebellion. He's told by a policeman, stop, and he goes. That's why he was shot. But you can't tell the blacks that, no. The whites are oppressing us. So they don't want to look at the real source of their problems. I'm not saying there is no racism. There is. I have traveled and I've been subjected to some of it. But if you really want to help the black American, it is not to get the whites out of America and hand it over to the blacks. If they continue the way they are behaving, they will continue with their problems. So they don't want to look at the real problem. And that's why for them, instead of addressing fatherless families, they've decided, why not just redefine the family? Since there are no fathers, let's say that families don't need fathers. A mother with 3 children, I've got nothing against single mothers, but it is not God's plan. It is not the ideal situation. It comes about because of sin. And we need to call it that. I'm black and white, I'm sorry. I have friends, by the way, who are single mothers, who are born again. But it is not God's plan. God's plan was a man, a woman, and then children. That's what happened in the Garden of Eden. Anything that happened after that was because of sin, because of a fallen nature. So when Black Lives Matter comes and says, let's redefine the nuclear family. Nuclear family is a white, Western, oppressist thing. Is the one they're having working for them? Anyway, I can preach about Black Lives Matter. Let's move on. Ideological advocacy. Next one. Interest group advocacy. So this is where you have lobby groups. And why we call it interest group advocacy is that they have a very narrow agenda, yeah? So it's not necessarily an agenda that's good for the whole public. So for example, when you see gun control in the US, you've heard of the NRA, the ones who like selling guns. They're an interest group. So generally, guns is a big problem in the US. From a public health perspective, they need to get rid of the guns. But because there's a rich, well-funded group that is lobbying for a single issue, just guns, everybody must have guns, they have managed to dictate the policy. And so that's what I mean by an interest group. Very often, they're just agitating for their own interest. Sometimes it's successful, other times it doesn't, but it's successful when they have got a lot of resources and organization to be effective. There's legislative advocacy, which ILA also does, which is where you're looking at working on the laws to be able to create change. There is mass advocacy. What's the example of mass advocacy in Kenya?
Resist.
Eti?
Resist.
Resist, yes. And those of us who come from that direction. So basically they believe in large numbers, street advocacy. ILA doesn't do this one. And there's a reason why we don't do it. It's not very effective. In terms of actually changing policies and structures. So what were we resisting in Kenya? Those of us who resisted. Why were we out on the street in our numbers? Please, let's talk. We come from this country. Stop pretending you are not here in 2007, 2013. Yes?
Elections.
Stolen elections, yeah? Why were the elections stolen, if they were stolen? So that I don't look like Nina Legea Pande Moja.
Supposedly rigged.
Yeah, so our system of elections is not right. Despite our resisting, have we managed to change that system?
No.
So that's the problem with mass advocacy. It causes distraction, but it does not actually change the structures and policies unless you move from mass advocacy to policy advocacy. Remember, I don't know, I wasn't here when Mutava talked, so I think he mentioned IPPG, yeah? Did he? The first movement for changing the constitution in Kenya? Or was it, who else would have talked about it? Kivuta Kibwana. So they started a process that first started in the streets as mass advocacy, yeah? And then eventually the church came in and they formed a group and they started redrafting the constitution. And then eventually Moi caved and eventually the law changed and multi-party came in. So mass advocacy on its own, other than destabilizing everybody and perhaps creating momentum for change, does not actually result in change. So that's the reason ILA doesn't do it as ILA. Of course, I was highly tempted to go to Uhuru Park until I remembered I've got 3 children. Then I decided to sit at home. Media advocacy. The strategic use of the mass media as a resource to advance a social or public policy initiative. We've been talking a lot about teenage pregnancies, yeah? Due to corona. Do you think this is the first time girls are getting pregnant in Kenya?
No.
Yeah.
So why suddenly has it come with the heat that it has come? Why? You're whispering, talk. Let's talk. We are talking about Kenya, yeah? I'm trying to avoid lecturing you people. So these are things that you know. So partly, yes, there was a problem because our girls were at home, the predators were also at home, and the parents were not. But there's also an agenda in this country. Remember I talked about ideologies?
Yeah.
What's the agenda? Those of us that know. Yes, Boniface?
The abortion.
Yes, there's an abortion agenda.
Sex education.
Sex education agenda. Contraception. There are all sorts of agendas. And eventually, where does it end? Homosexuality. They all come together. Remember, we've just come from trouncing the world. What happened? Did you people hear of the Conference on Population and Development that took place in Kenya? And we shocked the whole world. They still can't believe what happened. They had come here thinking that they had won the day because of the European Union. And then what happened? Praise the Lord for Trump, brethren. I know some here are Democrats. Praise the Lord for Trump, because America stood with the third world. All the rest of the world was on that side. We angushed that agenda. So they are smarting, isn't it? Because they haven't got what they wanted. So Corona was a perfect thing. It created conditions. Everybody's anxious, or our daughters are going to get pregnant. So now suddenly policymakers are listening. That the solution to your girls not getting pregnant, other than opening the schools so that you can take them back to school, the predators back to school, the teacher in charge, there'll be no pregnancies. For me, that's the solution. It's not abortion. Rudisha watoto kwa shule. No. The solution is, because your girl is going to have sex anyway, why don't we put some contraception? At age what? What age? 13, 14. After we've put some contraception, even before we get there, starting from age 4, what do we tell your little darling, those of you who have got one? That sex is? No. Sex is what? Aye, you people, and you're going to work in public service. Sex is a human right. Yes. You've not heard that one? You've not been told that you're deprived because you've not had sex in the last 6 months? WHO has actually passed that not having a sexual partner and regular sex is a form of disability. You guys are all disabled. You don't know? Anyway, that's not what brought us here today. Let's move on to the next slide. Let's move on to the next slide. So anyway, there's an agenda, yeah? Okay. Let's go to what we came here to discuss today, policy advocacy. And now you can see why I'm an advocate, yeah? So, advocacy, there are two definitions here. One from the Support for Analysis and Research in Africa, the other from the International Center for Policy Advocacy. So advocacy is an action directed at changing the policies, positions, or programs of any type of institution. So again, here it's structural. It aims at putting a problem on the agenda, providing a solution to that problem, and building support for acting on both the problem and solution. Advocacy can aim to change an organization internally or to alter an entire system. Now, don't laugh at changing an organization. Depending on the organization, it can change the world, yeah? Right now, that comprehensive sexuality education agenda is at the UN in every way. It's at UNICEF, it's at UNIFPA, UNDP, it's everywhere. And once they succeed, so again, praise the Lord for Brother Trump. Well, brother in quotes. Some things he does are not brotherly. While he was in the UN, president of the US was putting a damper on these things. Now that he's out, what has Biden already said? Those of you who are Democrats, you should know his manifesto. What has he said? He has revoked the Mexico policy. Have you heard of that? Yes. You even need to read. One of the first executive orders he has signed is actually on the LGBTQ issue. And they have said that as part of the agenda is not just resolving those issues in the US, it is using their diplomacy and foreign affairs. Remember when Obama came here? What happened?
It was Uhuru.
And what did Uhuru say? That is not an issue right now. What should we expect when Biden comes calling? More of the same. So, sometimes when you change an organization, you can change the whole world. And right now, that's an agenda at the UN. It encompasses approaches adopted by organizations and coalitions in trying to change or preserve specific government programs. That is, approaches focused on influencing decisions of public policy. And yesterday, Arms told us what public policy is, yeah? So public policy is not just budget, it's all those other issues. But basically, it is policies by the government. And so the key words there is either trying to change a policy, so from A to B, or trying to keep it the way it is, which is what we are fighting for. We are trying to keep homosexuality laws the way they are. So it could be either. You're trying to build or you're trying to remove. Next one. It involves a strategy to affect policy change or action, i.e. start, direct, or prevent a specific public policy change. The primary audience is decision makers, though it can use secondary audiences, e.g. the public. So then they try to show like the public is in support. So you'd use things like opinion polls, or suddenly you've got all these stories. So you find Friday news, they have a pregnant young mother being interviewed. Saturday, they have another pregnant woman being interviewed. So they're building a narrative, isn't it? That the public is in support of this thing. They can be through their advisors. In Kenya, we would call them like kitchen cabinet. In actual fact, in Kenya, that's where a lot of the action happens. And then the media, and maybe Celine will share a bit about kitchen cabinets. It involves a deliberate process of persuasive communication, which means getting the target audience to understand your issue. That's where the policy analysis and research comes in, to be convinced, and then more importantly, to take ownership of the idea being presented as if it is theirs. And so one of the things in policy advocacy is that very often you are not mentioned. So you don't do this to take the credit. And that's why for me, any organization that takes the credit is not effective. So ILA, when you hear tobacco control, you don't hear ILA. Even unclaimed financial assets, you knew about it, but you didn't know about us. So we never take the credit. For us, we are happy if I see the minister there parroting stuff I wrote for her. I'm very happy. I've succeeded. That is policy advocacy. To get her to think it's her own words, or even if she doesn't think so, to behave, to pretend that they are hers. It requires the building of momentum and support, and is carried out by a group of organized citizens. So I've now given you a very nice textbook explanation. You'll have the slide so you can look at it. Next one, please. So what's the place of advocacy within Christian mission? So this is a quote I got from World Vision. If secular advocacy is calling on government officials to pay attention to what's important to you, biblical advocacy is reminding them to do what God has called them to do. That's what Professor Nkansa was talking about, public theology, isn't it? A Christian engaging in advocacy is focusing policymakers on what is important to God. What have we been told is important to God over the last 4 days? What have you been hearing? Yes?
He loves justice.
He loves justice. What else is important to God? Yes?
He is concerned
He's concerned about what?
about the issues that are affecting our country.
Okay. Who is he concerned about, Joshua?
The poor, the widows, the aliens.
The aliens. So that is what is up there. And so a Christian engaging in advocacy is reminding policymakers about those issues because God cares about them. And so advocacy is a part of integral mission. For me, how I summarize integral mission, we are saving both the soul and the body. Next one. So I'll repeat a bit of what has been said. I think maybe God wanted you to hear it. During integral mission, Francis talked about 4 doctrines. Can anyone remember the 3 that he talked about before we go on to the 4th one? God, the doctrine of man. So the 4th one he didn't have time to go into was the doctrine of the kingdom of God. And so at I11 when we were brainstorming our vision and mission and what we want to achieve, we wanted to bring the kingdom of God. I think it's in the Lord's Prayer where he says, the kingdom come, on earth as it is in heaven. And so when you're looking at the doctrine of the kingdom of God, it's basically saying that in the Garden of Eden, God had his ideal kingdom. God was the king. He had put his subjects in the garden, which was the kingdom, and everything was good. And as we were told by Njonjo, because man was created in God's image, he had dignity and he had to exercise dominion. And when sin came, those two fell apart. So it's very hard to be dignified when you're poor, isn't it? When you're begging, when you're oppressed. And so the devil stole man's dignity from, actually we stole it from ourselves because we are the ones that ate the fruit. And then in terms of exercising dominion, we then moved from stewardship, where you took care of what you had, to selfishness, isn't it? Taking as much as you could. And then finally, all the relationships were right in the kingdom. And so man was right with God, man was right with nature, and man was right with fellow man, or in that case it was a woman at the time, was right with woman. Then sin came into the world, it destroyed all the relationships. So of course man's relationship with God fell apart. He changed his relationship with nature, it became exploitative, and even the power relationships in society changed. Remember what the woman was told? You shall be beneath the man. That's where social classes started coming in. And so relationships were damaged. So then God came up with a plan of redemption. And basically, you have got to restore his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. And so if the fall affected man spiritually and physically, then the solution must also be physical and spiritual. And that, in summary, is really what integral mission is about. So even as we save the soul, which is spiritual, we also have to save the body, and then the world in which that body lives. And so when you're engaging in advocacy, it doesn't matter what issue you pick. So we picked health. You can obviously see where we are saving the body there, isn't it? Because the body gets sick, and either we can prevent sickness or the sickness should be treated. The spiritual is that spirit happens to live in a body. And sometimes when people are sickly, they cannot serve God. And so for us, that's how we are doing integral mission. And then, of course, then the structures that came about because of sin that create health inequalities, for example. Next one. So this, I think, was talked about on the first day. I came in as Oliver was ending, about God's ideal kingdom, the children of Israel. And he gave very detailed instructions on how the society was supposed to run. So those things are not spiritual, they're actually just governance principles. And so even when we are engaging in governance advocacy, and so you had Arms very passionate about, well, against BBI. I think he was against. I'm not trying to convince anybody. It's just that he's against. And so basically, there are certain things that God had instituted for how society was to run. And a lot of the things in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy are about power relations in a society. How you take care of the poor, the widow, the fatherless. He talks about how a man and a woman should treat each other. He even talked about divorce. What happens when your neighbor's goat eats your maize. All of those are just how to order society, yeah? So God is actually in government. It's a political government, yeah? And Christ was God's ideal king. And then, of course, we are given the characteristics of God's kingdom, which is righteousness, peace, joy, mercy, truth, and justice. And so we at ILA, that's what we are fighting for. And so as we are trying to change laws, we are trying to get those things. Can people be peaceful when the mother is dying of cancer and they cannot afford treatment? No. Peace has just checked out. Are those children joyful? The woman who was boiling stones in Mombasa, there was no joy in that house. When we are talking about fighting every election season, so all of these problems, they can be resolved if we just brought God's characteristics. And so as we engage in advocacy, that is what is driving us. There's one more thing sometimes I tell people, even if you don't care about the rest, because you personally are fine. A lot of us here, I think, are middle class, eh? Am I right? Or maybe you count yourself uko chini. It's possible. The reason why you're middle class is because you have a university education. Do you know what percentage of Kenya has got a university education? Of course, now you've become many. There are 16 campuses. Me in my day, there are only 5. Even with 16, you're still a very small fraction. So if you have a university degree, you're middle class. Stop thinking you're uko chini. You're middle class. So sometimes we middle class people don't care about the rest, isn't it? Because we get private solutions to public problems. What do I mean? I live in Langata where there's no water. In all of our houses, there's a tank. So instead of us lobbying Nairobi Water so that water comes every day so that I can open the tap, I simply put a 20,000 liter tank. See, that's a private solution. And when there's no water, what do? I call Bowser. Private solution to a public problem. What did Arms tell you about where his kids go to school? How many of us here went to academy? Just tell the truth. Yeah. Some of us went to academy. Some of us went to primary school. Do you know the difference between academy and primary school? One is public, one is private. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's a reason why, even those of us who went to primary school like me, I went to St. George's here in Nairobi. I went to Alliance. I went to University of Nairobi, all public. Where are my kids right now? Academy. Why? Because the public primary school system has broken down. So I've done the middle class thing. Instead of solving the problem, banging on Magoha's door, why are you telling kids to learn under trees? What have I done? I've taken to academy. So that's what we middle class do. When there's a problem in the public, we get a private solution. What does that verse there tell us? Jeremiah 29:7. God is against that kind of behavior. In fact, I should feel condemned right now. And all of us who are doing these things, what does he say? Seek the peace of the city where I have caused you to be carried away captives. Pray to the Lord for it, for in its peace you shall have peace. So, in your own best interest, you better solve the problems of Kenya. That's what God is telling you. The same way they were told that about Babylon. That's what he's telling us about Nairobi. It's what he's telling us about Kenya. That if we are going to live in peace in this country as the middle class, we have to address what is affecting the guy in Kibera. I live across from Kibera, eh? It's just a road in between us. It's called the Southern Bypass. During that election, the one before the handshake, when all hell broke loose, we smelled the tear gas. We heard the gunshots. The only thing separating us was the road. You know, we all moved away from the windows. Why? Stray bullet. So you can think you're in Langata, you're safe. Does that spare you from a stray bullet? So the guys in Kibera are being shot and you're here in Langata, oh, we are middle class, we are safe. What happens when the bullet comes and meets you at the window? There's one story of a kid who was killed by a stray bullet, isn't it? Yeah. So that's what this verse is saying. If you don't solve the problems that are causing guys in Kibera to riot because you live in Langata, thinking that you're safe, you are not safe. The day this country burns, we are burning with it. And I see Kibera every day. And it scares me. Because there are angry young people inside there. One day they will get tired. Even Raila won't be able to stop them. You know, right now he controls them. Now he's left them. See, he shook hands. He stopped being with them. So the day they resist without him, us guys in Langata are gone. So that's what I'm telling you. If you do not solve Kenya's problems, when Kenya is burning, what happened when Raila got sick during Corona? What did he do? He went to Dubai. Are you about to go to Dubai? Anybody here who can afford a ticket? And he didn't even go by an ordinary plane. He took a private jet. Do you have your private jet? So why aren't you making noise because Kenyatta is not working? Doctors have been on strike for how long and you guys are seated here? Why aren't you in the street? Because the day you get sick, you can't go to Dubai. You'll need that hospital. That's what I'm saying. So we have to stop being middle class. Let's engage with these things. Lastly, who are we advocating against? Jonjo mentioned this. Sometimes when we are doing advocacy, we forget that it's a spiritual battle. So one, we want to do it in our own strength. And then two, we think that the person on the other end is the person I'm fighting. You have to forget it's not a person you're fighting. You're fighting a spiritual system. What happened in the Garden of Eden? The devil got temporary possession, yeah? And I'm using the word possession. I'm looking at the lawyers here. There's a difference between possession and ownership. So who owns the earth? The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Who currently possesses it? Those fellows, isn't it? They are not flesh and blood. They are powers. They are rulers of darkness. There's spiritual wickedness in high places. Barnes, I liked your quote about the wickedness of whiskey. That's what we are meaning by wickedness. So when you look at alcohol in this country, do you see that golden drink he was talking about? Or do you see the devil bottled in a bottle? That's wickedness, isn't it? It's wickedness when in a village at 10 o'clock in the morning, all the men are high. That is wickedness. You can't say that's mwenjoyo at I like having 1 or 2 after work. That's not 1 or 2 after work. That is wickedness. That's why we do alcohol control. Because I have campaigned and seen villages in Western Kenya, 10 o'clock in the morning, all the men are high. He knows what I'm talking about. And they are not high on Tusker. What are they high on? Busa. Who has bought the Busa? Those of you who know. The MP. I was campaigning in Funyula and Otuoma in his whatever village, his house. He had a pot of Busa boiling 24/7. That was his campaign strategy. That is wickedness. And I'm very passionate about these things. So when you're fighting, even when we are resisting, and you think that those of us in the street are merely fighting against Uhuru and Ruto, that's not who we are fighting. We are fighting against wickedness in high places. So what does that tell you then about the strategy? What must you do? In addition to all the other things Celine will tell you about how to advocate, getting your research and your whatevers and your campaigns, you must do all of those things because there's a science to advocacy. But as a Christian, where does it start? It starts on your knees. And unfortunately, I used to pray more when ILA started than I pray now. Because now I know how to do these things. When I started, I didn't know how to lobby, I didn't know how to draft, and I didn't have any money. See, now you've seen my title, Regional Manager. So money is not a problem anymore. So I stopped praying. Now I do things the human way. There's a way of doing the NGO thing. I know how to write budget, proposal, report. I forget sometimes to pray. And so remember always, who are you fighting against? And the only way these guys are dealt with is not by mass advocacy resisting. It's not by Okia Mtata, even it's not by Njonjo grabbing flags. It starts here.